In this video, we're going to document a database as part of a broader initiative where we want to have an enterprise logical model mapped to multiple separate physical data models. This is a common scenario for many organizations who want accurate representations of their data sources via physical data models, but also want to have a canonical view of the organization overall. The enterprise logical model will usually be maintained in its own right, separate from the physical data models, so it is important to be able to map between them for impact analysis of changes. We will show the steps involved in creating these mappings, show how these mappings are displayed within EOS Studio Data Architect, and finally, how they can be easily shared and communicated using EOS Studio Team Server. First of all, we load the enterprise data model into EOS Studio Data Architect. To do this, we will log into the EOS Studio repository by clicking the repository menu, Login, OK. And once that completes, again from the repository menu, we will select Diagrams and Get from Repository, which will allow us to retrieve our enterprise logical data model. The name of the data model is HR Database Enterprise Logical, so I should select that and OK. And that's now retrieved the data model. I'm going to close this. You may optionally also open the other two models in the folder should you wish to take a look at them. These are the two physical models. Note that universal mappings will be used to define mappings between the separate model projects to show relations between the logical definitions and the physical definitions. Universal mappings require the models to be stored in the EOS Studio repository. We'll now check out the enterprise data model so that we can work with it and add the universal mappings. To do that, I shall click at the database enterprise logical model and I shall say check out diagram. We can add in detailed change records and tasks, but for this video I'm just going to add in a comment to say that we're configuring universal mappings and say OK to perform the checkout. We can now use the compare and merge utility to automatically attempt to match objects to create the universal mappings from the logical to the physical models. So to do that, I'm going to select logical model, I'm going to right click and I'm going to say compare and merge. Now I'm going to compare this against another file in my repository, as that's where the physical models are held. So I'm going to go ahead and once the dialog appears, I'm going to select my HR database physical employee model and we'll OK. And hit the next button. We're getting a warning here just telling us that we don't currently have the physical model open in EOS Studio. That's fine. It will prompt us at the end if it needs to make changes to that model file and update them. So I'm going to compare from my logical model through to this empty physical model. And I'm going to take the defaults here, so this just allows us to select the objects that we want to include and also the specific entities and tables, which again will take everything. Now, compare and merge can be used to actually resolve differences between different models. So here it's telling us that there are some differences between the logical model on the left and the physical model on the right. But in our case, we're just going to use this to match up universal mappings. So to do that, I click the box here. And I'm just going to check that it's saying to save as universal mappings, which is already selected. Save all the mappings. And I'm also going to say, let's synchronize those mapping changes back to the repository immediately. So I'll OK that, save the matches, and finish. So again, it's prompting me, do I want to save those changes back to that physical model, because we don't currently have it open inside EOS Studio. So I'm going to say yes, and yes, we'll save that file. So that should now have completed automatically creating those universal mappings for us. Let's now take a look at how we actually view those mappings within the data model. So in my logical data model here, I'm going to go across to one of the entities, and I'm going to select employee. I shall double click on employee to open the details behind it, and here we'll see things like the attribute definitions, but in this case I'm going to go straight to a tab called Where Used, and here we can now see that it's telling me that this employee entity is used in my logical data model, and it will also tell me specifically any submodels that it's used in, so it's used in training. And it's also telling me that there's a universal mapping which is mapping it through to the emp table definition inside my physical model called emp_db. So we can now click OK to close that. We can also create these mappings manually. So to show how we do this, on my employee entity again, I'm just going to right click and select Universal Mappings. This will open up the Universal Mappings editor. So this has a number of panes that are displayed, and the first thing to check is that we are highlighting employee in our logical model on this top center window. The next thing I can do is go over to the left hand pane and select the model that I want to map to. So we've automatically mapped things through to our physical employee model already. So in this case I'm going to expand out my physical skills model, and that's the skills DB. So I'll select that. On the right hand side here we have some options which control the object types we see. So I'm just going to select entity table from the data architecture diagram, and here we're now seeing a list of those tables that are stored in our skills DB physical model. So I'm going to select to create a mapping to the emp table. Also, if you scroll to the right, you do have the option to add some comments and notes onto the mapping. So I could open that up and just say mapping from enterprise logical model to physical model, and OK. And if I OK that, that's going to save that away. So now if we open up the employee entity like we did before, and I look at the Where Used tab, we can now see that we have two universal mappings. So the one that was created automatically through to emp_db, and also the one that we've just created manually through to skills_db. So we're now showing impact analysis from our logical enterprise model through to where else it's mapped and used in our physical models. And we'll just OK to close that window. These mappings can also be created against individual attributes and columns, not just entities and tables, to provide a finer layer of granularity. So I'm now just going to check my model back into the repository. So we select our model, right click and say check in diagram, and again we've got the option to provide change records or comments. This is still regarding configuring universal mappings, so I'm just going to leave that as it is. And I'm also going to make sure that I check this box here called Auto Publish, which will update this model out into the Team Server web browser interface. OK. I'm now going to switch to the Team Server web browser interface and explain and show how this information is displayed in that environment. Team Server provides a web browser interface into the models that are stored in our EOS Studio repository. There are two main ways to find information within the Team Server web browser UI: by browsing the Model Explorer and by searching. We'll explain both ways. If I know the details of the EOS Studio data model that I want to view, I can directly browse that using the Model Explorer. So I'm going to open up my projects folder, and I know that it's stored in my human resources, and this is my enterprise logical model. I can expand that out further and see the details behind my logical model, and if I hover over these items we'll see a thumbnail appearing to preview what is part of the data model. If I click the small icon next to that, this will open up a new tab which will provide a HTML rendering of the data model. This is a read-only view, so I cannot make changes to the objects, though I can move things around, and I can also take screenshots and print screens from here. Because I know that I want to go to the employee entity, I'm going to use the drop down over here to say entity employee, and I'm going to double click on that employee object from my diagram, which will show me the details behind it. From here, I can see full details of the employee entity, including things like the definition and the attribute information. But for this video, we're just going to scroll down and see the universal mappings. And here we can see that those two mappings that I created from the employee entity are being displayed here. So the emp table within the physical employee data model and the emp table within the physical skills data model. You can click on the hyperlinks here to take you directly to the details of the physical data models. You can also search for particular objects that are stored in the data model. So if I go to the ER objects page here and I type in employee, that will bring back any matches across the whole of my repository. So you'll see I'll get a number of hits coming back here based on objects at the logical level and the physical level. I can also filter these on the left hand side. So because I'm trying to find my entity in my enterprise logical model, I'm going to select entity. So here we can see employee entity in my enterprise logical data model. So again, I could click here on the employee page and it will take me directly through the details and show me the universal mappings. Do feel free to explore the other published models within the team server environment or go back to Data Architect to create additional universal mappings. So to summarise, we loaded our enterprise logical data model and created mappings both automatically and manually to our physical data models. We then showed how this information is shown in Data Architect and how it can be shared within the EOS Studio team server environment. This functionality can be very important for impact analysis when working with multiple different models within your organisation. For more information, please go to idera.com/contact sales.